There are a lot of government agents out there looking for ways to make our lives more difficult, seems to be the goal. But there are also many freedom fighters out there ready to go to bat for people who are being harassed by government regulators. And one who I know personally has been working this course for a long, long time is my next guest. Dave Roland is the general counsel with the Freedom Foundation, and he has represented people around the country who've had the government regulators breathing down their necks. Dave Roland, welcome to Smart Life.
Dr. Gina, it is so great to talk to you.
So great to talk to you, my old friend. I remember interviewing you about 4 years ago. You were representing a family who I believe it was a lemonade stand at the time, being all kinds of harassed. Was that what it was?
It was Girl Scout cookies. We had a couple of Girl Scouts just outside of St. Louis who were selling cookies in their own driveway. And one of their neighbors decided they didn't like it and called the city on them. And so, you and I had that conversation talking about their situation. We ended up having the girls on your radio show at one point.
Right.
But we fought back on their behalf and, tried to remind people that, we have a thing called property rights in this country. And if the government has gotten so big that it can even prevent Girl Scouts from selling cookies in their own driveway, then we've got a huge problem in this country.
Gainful employment, I guess, for lawyers defending liberty. And so we certainly appreciate your work because I'll tell you what, these problems have gone from bad to worse. I remember this was dumbfounding when I heard this, but now I read these cases almost every day.
Yeah, it's really appalling, and it happens at all levels of government. So, we talked about the city, the local officials going after these Girl Scouts with their cookie stand, and we've seen it all over the country with lemonade stands and produce stands that little kids are running. But it happens at the state level too, and it also happens at the federal level. I don't know if you remember, but there was an example of a farmer in southwestern Missouri who got a knock on the door one day from someone from the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
I know exactly what you're talking. This is the bunnies.
That's right.
Yeah, I remember covering this on my show too. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the USDA showed up on their doorstep one day and said, "We heard that you've got rabbits here." And not knowing any better, Mrs. Dollarhide allowed these federal agents to come in and look at their little rabbit selling operation. Over 2 years, they had only made about $500 profit total with selling these little rabbits. And lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, they get notice from the federal government that they were on the hook for millions of dollars in fines because apparently raising rabbits and selling them is regulated by the federal government. But they didn't know this. No one could have possibly known this.
Yeah.
But the government was trying to bilk them for more than $3 million.
After they made $500 off of their bunnies. I remember this, the Dollarhide family. I think since then she's even written a book about this topic.
That's right.
What's the upshot of that story? I guess I should ask you first.
So the good news is that sometimes you punch the bully in the nose and the bully tucks tail and runs. And that's what happened with the Dollarhides. The government picked on the wrong people. They called up an attorney locally, and then they got in touch with me, and ultimately they got in touch with their U.S. senators. And they were able to fight back against the USDA and win. The USDA ended up dropping all of the complaints against them, all the charges against them, and basically just leaving them alone. So,
but part of that, though, Dave, and we have to be fair about this because this isn't every citizen's experience. And I know in particular with the Dollarhides and their bunny heist by the USDA, in their particular case, they were savvy. They knew exactly where to go. They came straight to media. They were all over national media about this story, believe it or not. And then they knew how to get the political wheels and the connected folks in D.C. doing something about it. So they fought on every front. Not everybody has the kind of time to do something like that when their liberties are offended. And this is a big part of the problem. And then there's another part of the problem that you have answers to as well, and that is how to fund. Who's going to pay for all of these court costs and so on and so forth? And this is where you specialize. So tell people, if they find themselves in a situation where their liberties are being trounced, what can they really do?
Well, so here's some good news. There is a nationwide network of public interest attorneys that are specializing now in fighting back against the government on behalf of the little guy. Right. And many of these public interest attorneys, like myself, are able to do this kind of work without charging the clients. Now, the bad news is that there are only so many of us, and there are only so many resources that we have.
But there are lots of government bureaucracies, and they have limitless resources.
It is a David and Goliath situation, but here's the good news. Groups like ours, like the Institute for Justice that I used to work for in Washington, D.C., like Pacific Legal Foundation out here on the West Coast, we are winning victories and slowly turning the tide in favor of ordinary citizens. It's a long process, and there are going to be people that we can't help, and sometimes we're going to lose cases. But overall, we're advancing the ball for individual liberty and restoring the power of the individual citizen against government at all levels.
And so you feel like basically you're winning more cases, you collectively, winning more cases than losing, and that we are making strides? Because to me it seems like there are just more and more of these cases. So am I wrong? Are there more of these cases and we just happen to be winning more, so we really are making strides? Or are we just hearing more about these cases? What's the reality there in terms of can you give us any data, I guess is what I'm asking.
So we're winning in some areas, and we are just now starting the fight in some areas.
Okay.
So, for example, one of the areas that I work in a lot is economic liberty, a person's right to earn a living without the government coming in and forcing them to get a license and forcing them to jump through all of these unnecessary hoops. Mm-hmm. Just earlier this week, Pacific Legal Foundation won a case in Kentucky, and the court said, you just can't have laws that are intended to protect favored industries from competition. In that case, it dealt with moving companies, and Kentucky state law allowed established moving companies to veto applications for business license from would-be competitors. And the only purpose for this was to protect these insiders, these industry insiders,
sure, it always is,
against competition.
Right.
And this
same thing with the
Kentucky
smoking regulation, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, but this case in Kentucky is now the 5th federal case that has said we're not going to tolerate these laws that pick winners and losers in this industry. So we're gaining a lot of ground there. Now, we talked about some of the problems at the local level when we're talking about, government trying to shut down little kids' concession stands. Also, we've got government trying to shut down people who are growing gardens in their own yards.
Nice.
And
we know about the milk regulations, and we're almost out of time. But I do want to have you tell us where we can find out more about this and find out more about your work, which I think is funded mostly privately if people want to help out.
Yeah, so the Freedom Foundation is part of a nationwide network. If you live in a state, look up the name of your state and Free Market Think Tank, and it's possible that your state.
All right, awesome.
It's possible that your state has a group that has a litigation group like ours. Get in touch with them, and they may be able to help.
Absolutely. Dave Roland, thank you for being on the show. Folks can always get in touch with me if they want to know more. And we will absolutely continue discussing regulation of your pocketbook coming up here on Smart Life. You stay tuned.